Que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم والله أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني
Long live Palestinian resistance. Long live the liberation struggles of the Palestinian peoples and all oppressed peoples against Zionism, against imperialism, against settler colonialism, and all demonic entities out there, including Israel, the satanic entity, the imperialist entity in the Ummah, in the Middle East, and on the globe, honestly. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 97 of Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, Palestine resists genocide, exposing the genocide being carried out against Palestinian people by the settler Israeli regime. We're going to discuss Palestinian resistance to Zionist terror, both past and present. We're going to talk about how Palestinian people are organizing and mobilizing against Israeli state violence. We're going to shed light on the dark psychology, the twisted mindset of Zionism and how it is perpetuated in mainstream media, especially today with all of the talk and accusations about everyone and everything being, quote, anti-Semitic. So we're going to get into that. And we're going to also discuss what the movement looks like moving forward for Palestinian liberation, what some of the different perspectives and points of views and debates are going on within the Palestinian community. Joining me today are two amazing comrades. Joining me first is Falastini Moghtareb. Falastini is a Palestinian-American university professor and socialist. He has been politically active in and out of the U.S. for the last 20 years. He was formerly chairman of the North American Committee Against Zionism and Imperialism in the U.S. from 2005 to 2010. He writes about Palestine regularly and is currently working on a book about Palestinian resistance. And also a shout out to my comrade Flame of Liberation, who actually introduced me to Falastini. Comrade Flame of Liberation is a really good guy, really good content creator. Please make sure to check out his channel as well. And please make sure to check out the works by Falastini Moghtareb. How's it going, brother Falastini?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ramiro, for the opportunity to meet you and Comrade Libre and everyone who's listening in. I'm thinking maybe you're half of my age, and it's always good to connect with younger people to see that you're carrying on with the work that I have been involved with since, 20 years ago. You remind me of my younger years when I went to Cuba and I went to North Korea, and I took a lot of slack for that from the FBI and from the US government, who came to my home, and I was held for interrogation in the airport. And just it's wonderful to listen to Guevara again. Never trust imperialism, not for a minute, not for a minute. They will cut your throat. And it's great the work that you're doing. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to speak to you and everyone else.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful to hear. And I'd love to hear more about your background in a bit, because it seems like, as an elder in the movement, I also don't want to make you seem like you're like super old. You're not too old, but it's really inspiring to hear that, man. I really appreciate that. And yeah, we got to continue that movement, and we have to continue to push for Palestinian liberation. And I have a lot of respect, especially for the OGs and the movement, because they were also pushing it at a time when speaking out against Israel was more, quote unquote, controversial and even more brutal. And I think nowadays, honestly, I think the public opinion is swinging in a good way more toward Palestinian liberation. I could imagine that must have been hard in the 80s and the 90s and stuff, but we'll get into that in a second. Also joining me is Comrade Libre, Afro-Boricua poet, organizer, and communist based out of Miami, Florida, whose organizing involves moving theory into practice. As a member of the Troika Collective, shout out to Troika, they organize in their communities, and as internationalists, they build with movements in the global south and across Turtle Island. And Comrade Libre actually just got back from Palestine. How's it going, Comrade Libre?
Marhaba, everybody. Peace, peace. All is well. All is beautiful. I'm still processing a lot. This is actually my first interview since being back. Spent about 14 days there, with mostly focused on the olive harvest and food sovereignty efforts in Palestine against the Zionist powers. The illegal settler colonial project is not real. And so excited to be in this space of learning, of sharing, and also just to talk about a lot of the historical things that are happening in this very moment in Palestine that doesn't get out unless you're either there or have gone there. And so really excited to be in this space today, and thanks for everyone for being here. Hopefully we can all learn something new, and we can continue building against Zionism for the liberation of Palestine by any means.
Most definitely. And shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. Shout out to Holly Horn, to Ware Pilgrim, to Martin Hernandez, to Spencer, to My Written Voice. Y'all are awesome. And I see you guys on the streams a lot, so I appreciate that. Please share this. I think this is an important conversation to have, especially now that quote unquote anti-Semitism is all over the news, with what happened with Kanye. And it seems like we're getting a very false and controlled narrative about what anti-Semitism is and anti-Zionism. And of course, the Zionist entity is always trying to posit anybody who is critical of Israel as an anti-Semite. The usual tactics, the tactics have not changed. And we're going to be talking about that and why it's important to defend the Palestinian people against what is correctly called a genocide. It's not a conflict. It's not both sides are equally bad. Both sides need to work and help out. Both sides need to come to like there's clearly one side that is more powerful, that has the financial backing, military backing, that is Israel, right? And then you have Palestine, which has no organized army, that has been cut off and strangled economically, that has been isolated, that is being wiped out by Israel. So there's a clear, genocide going on. It's not a conflict. And I think it's important to frame that because, we're not liberals here. We're not people who are like, oh, let's find a kumbaya solution to both of this. There's a one Palestinian state solution, and that is Palestinian liberation. Also, shout out to Madonna, who's on the chat. And so I wanted to, mention that. I think it's important to mention that because there are people out there who call themselves pro-Palestine, but then you really look into their politics. I don't want to name names. I've done it on previous streams, but you look into some of their politics, and they're really just liberal Zionists who are just want to create like a two-party state and all this stuff, a two-state solution and all this stuff. So it's good to get that out there. But Comrade Falastini, I just wanted to ask you, maybe do you want to talk to us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in this, maybe your roots as a Palestinian, and where the movement has taken you so far?
Yeah, so I'm a first generation American, so I came to America when I was 17. Like many Palestinians, I was born in the diaspora. I have not been to Palestine for the simple reason that if I go to Palestine, and this is what we were taught since I was a child, we go as freedom fighters. We go to pick up the gun and fight to regain our homeland. We're not going to go back there under the Israeli flag and be insulted at checkpoints and denied entry into our own homeland. So for the longest time, large segments of Palestinians, today Palestinians number about 12 million. 6 million of them are inside, 6 million are outside. So I'm part of the 6 million that are outside. And those that live outside, many of them live in refugee camps. The largest refugee camps being in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. And so I have family members I'm in touch with. Every so often I will go to Lebanon, where my parents were born, in a refugee camp, at least one of them. My father was 5 years old when he was forced out of Palestine into Lebanon. He lived and grew up in a refugee camp. My mother was born in the refugee camp. And so we still have family members that live there. And if you go and visit our family members, you'll see two things. You'll see that they live in subhuman conditions. They're denied basic rights for, getting employment outside the refugee camps, education. Right now, the situation in Lebanon is extremely bad. Many of them don't have electricity. They don't have clean water and things, basic needs. It's been like that for the last 70 years. And but now it's in a particularly low point because of the deteriorating situation in Lebanon overall. So, I come from a refugee camp background, although my family, like many Palestinian families, ended up leaving to the Arab Gulf and got, like my father in the 60s, got a job and And so we lived a fairly comfortable life, but we never gave up on our claim to return to our homeland. And even after coming to the United States, in about through my college years, I quickly got involved in political organizing, and I've been doing it since. And so for the last 20 plus years, I've been part of many different organizations, many different initiatives. You mentioned that I was chairman of the anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist committee, and that didn't please the FBI nor the US government. But we were determined to work through which were very difficult circumstances. When I came to the US in 1988, people didn't know where Palestine was, and they've never met a Palestinian. Average Americans that I met, they didn't know. I was in Colorado at the time, and I went to school in Colorado. And none of the people that I met in Colorado, the white people, they knew where Palestine was. I had to point it out on a map. Today, the situation is very different. Today, everybody that I meet, pretty much, they'll know where Palestine is, geographically at least, not to say anything about the political conflict. And so in the 80s, it was very difficult to organize because at that time, there was a lot of ignorance. And another problem was if you said you were a socialist or a communist, you pretty much were, that was it. You could be fired you could be fired from your job. You could be ostracized. You could be denied employment. When I took the American oath, you had to swear that you were not a member of the Communist Party. It was like that. So McCarthyism was still very much alive. Today, speaking about your generation, for the first time in history, although I'm not a supporter of Bernie Sanders, you had a socialist president win, millions of American votes to become the first socialist president in the heart of imperialism, in the heart of the capitalist world, which would have been unheard of in 1988 when I first came to the country. So there has been quite a bit of change. And if there's anything that was positive out of Bernie Sanders, I don't like Bernie Sanders because he espouses a two-state solution. That's one of his problems. And so that's not going to, that's not going to end imperialism, nor is it going to build socialism in the United States, nor is he going to liberate Palestine. But what was good about that was that we had, millions of Americans vote socialist for the first time. So there is a change in the mainstream electoral votes of ordinary American citizens. Another big development, which didn't exist when I was young, when I was 17 years old, was today we have the first Palestinian-American congresswoman. Rashida Tlaib is the first Palestinian-American woman who is a Muslim, who's Arab, who's American, who's socialist, to be a member of the US Congress. And what I like about her, there's about 3 or 4 of them. There's Ilhan from Somalia, and there's Ocasio, from the Latino community. I'm not a fan of Ocasio because of her positions on Palestine in particular. But Rashida Tlaib, on the other hand, does not, as far as I know, and as far as I've read, espouse a two-state solution like Ocasio and the other ones do. And so she has been actually quite advanced in her political positions and opposition to Zionism, which I think presents somewhat of an opportunity today for young activists for Palestine to try to work with her on. I've even written an article where I ask her to recognize the Arab identity of Palestine, that this land belongs to the Arab people, and that And ultimate solution is to return the land to its rightful owners. And we can talk more about the details of that as the interview progresses. Yeah, so the political terrain has changed, and I think the work that you're doing in alternative media, what we're doing tonight, is very important, because the more and more younger Americans get to see the truth about imperialism and see the truth about the evils that it has created all over the world, not just in Palestine, but in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, anywhere it has. Just like Javara said in his speech, I mean, they are beasts if they are in Africa, and they are beasts in Palestine, and they are beasts in Latin America. You can't trust imperialism.
Well said. And I'm glad you hit on something very crucial, which is the international nature of Zionism. I think a lot of people make the mistake of isolating Zionism to just occupied Palestine, when in reality it affects all of our nations. In particular, in Latin America, we have a very close and intimate relationship with Zionism, in a bad way, of course, especially during the second half of the 20th century, after the creation of the so-called State of Israel. We have in Guatemala in 1956, after the coup a few years before of Jacobo Arbenz, who was a left-leaning liberal president of Guatemala who wanted to liberalize the economy and make it a little bit more progressive. The right-wing evangelical Guatemalan government since the 50s has been the first to recognize the State of Israel, and continues to be home to Israeli troops who train at Mossad, who train there. And actually, Israel played a major role in arming and funding the death squads during the 1980s that murdered indigenous communists in Guatemala who were part of the insurgency that was fighting against the evangelical right-wing government. Zionism has manifested itself in the Western Hemisphere as evangelical Christianity. A lot of these people who support Israel and have treated the language, if you look at the language that they use when talking about indigenous Guatemalans, it's very similar to the language they use describing indigenous Palestinians, right? Because Palestinians are indigenous to that land, and the Maya are indigenous to the land of Central America. And the language that these Zionists use to wipe them out and eradicate, this is really disgusting as well in Honduras and El Salvador and in Chile under Pinochet. All supported by Israel, all recognized Israel, and all received arms and funding and training from Israel. Actually, my family is very right-wing, Honduran family, and I had a cousin who was married to the former general of the Honduran military, and he had plaques in his house. So it was like School of the Americas, and it was like Israel and Mossad, and it was just really disgusting. So Israel has a very dark history in Latin America as well, that people should really look into, in the Caribbean as well, all over Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is very much an international issue. And I think even on the Korean Peninsula, as somebody who supports Korean reunification, I support the DPRK as well. The Zionists have stretched their hands out to quote unquote South Korea or occupied Korea and used it as a bastion for evangelical Christianity and Zionism, especially with the Moonies, who are freaking nuts, if you ask me. But that's, a separate discussion. Comrade Libre, you just got back from Palestine. I'd like to hear your thoughts about what was your perspective like being there as a Latino, right, as a Boricua, as somebody who obviously, comes from a different community, but there's so many similarities, right? There's so many things that are in common. And what I want to do, I just want to share this this picture that you sent me. Give me 1 second. This one right here. So this is tell us about this picture. Tell us about your trip. Tell us about what you were doing here, and what was your experience like in Palestine.
So we went on a olive harvest delegation with an organization called Eyewitness Palestine. If folks are interested, they do 2 delegations a year. Highly recommend it. But essentially, what we're doing at the image right there is separating olives that we had picked from the trees in the surrounding area, so that there's no debris, and the sacks of olives can be taken to an olive press to make olive oil, or they can be jarred and what is it? Pickled. Um, and so we were in Palestine picking zaytun, picking olives, because olives is a symbol of Palestinian resistance, because these trees, some of them age more than 1,000 years, proving that Palestinians are indigenous to the land that is currently being occupied. But they also serve as a source of income. I believe about 47% of the GDP of Palestinians comes from the olives. Um, and so it's symbolic to pick olives, but it's also a form of resistance, and maintaining of one's culture. And actually, the hat that I'm wearing in that image, um, the UAWC, agricultural workers, it's an agricultural workers union in Palestine that is one of 6 groups that recently were declared a terrorist group. Right? Farmers farming land is considered terrorism to Zionism, and just think about how that sounds, right? Um, and so farmers are some of the individuals that are leading resistance, in the sense that they are continuing to work the land, although they don't have access to most of the arable land due to the occupation. They make do with what they have. Um, while we were picking olives in these particular instances, nothing happened. But while we were there, at least 2 times we heard of very violent attacks. One elderly woman was stabbed and they broke both her kneecaps, and another delegation in the West Bank was beaten and they burned the olive trees. This is not something that is an anomaly. This is not something that happens sometimes. This is something that happens every olive harvest. And so you see international calls for individuals to go pick olives, because in some sense it can help to deter some of the violence that does happen. While we were picking olives in Bejala, there was tear gas. Why? Because eventually the tear gas gets the people picking the olives, and then you can't pick anymore. And so there are deliberate ways in which Zionism and the occupation forces attack the Palestinians as a whole, but also when it becomes time for harvesting, that they attack agriculture specifically. Um, and my trip in general was a beautiful trip. We were able to go to a place where most people, as the comrade was sharing, right, decades ago, people were not, like, Palestine was not in people's dialogue. The conversation was strictly Israel Holy Land centric, and now they're losing traction. And so we see increased violence against Palestinians, um, and we see uh, Palestinians taking advantage of a platform that they now have more access to, right? And talking about the occupation and the things that are happening in Palestine and occupied Palestine. So we spent most of our time in if you look on a map, what is the West Bank, but there's also occupied Palestine, which was the part of Palestine that was taken over in '48. So there's like 48 Palestinians, and there's 67 Palestinians after the Six-Day War. Those are the ones in the West Bank and Gaza. And we went to different organizations. We learned about what liberation struggle looks like in the expansiveness of the ways that Palestinians are choosing to resist. We met with another so-called terrorist organization that's a law firm that is advocating for Palestinians to be released from prison. One of their clients is a 12-year-old Palestinian that is being held illegally detained by Zionists, which is not uncommon, right? It is actually very common. It is Zionists are one of the only people that get away with detaining children without any communication with parents, torture. Majority of our tour guides had been detained between the age of 7 and 9 for months, for days at a time. These are children. And so this is why when we were in Palestine, there is no talk of a two-state solution, right? Uh, if if that was it's not a possibility. So let's not even discuss it as if it was. There's only one state solution. Return the land to Palestinians. Palestinians will decide what happens, and we get rid of the Zionist government. That is the goal. That is the only way forward, and that is Palestinian liberation. And how that happens will be determined by the Palestinians that are resisting. We are not to tell Palestinians how to resist, and it is going to be a struggle for peace that is going to involve a level of strategic violence, and that's just the reality. We did not choose violence. Violence was chosen for us, and so we use it for the end means of peace and socialism. And this is the task of the people. And we met a lot with very young Palestinians that talked about a very real reality where a lot of Palestinians, sometimes the best option is for them to leave Palestine. Unfortunately, due to Israeli laws, if you leave Palestine for more than 7 years, you lose uh, your permit, because Palestinians don't get passports, right? They're just given identity cards that they can use, and based on which identity card they have, they can go to different places if they're allowed through a checkpoint. Um, and this is part of the violence that they want Palestinians to leave. They want to continue building settlements, even though it's viewed as illegal settlements under international law. But what teeth does international law have to push back against Zionism, even though they recognize the illegality of it? And so we see all the types of violence that were forced onto Palestinians. Obviously, as a Boricua, I understand a struggle and a fight for land is coming from the oldest colony in the world, and being able to build connections and even have conversations about what is Palestinian and Boricua liberation look like in conjunction with one another, because they are intertwined. Um, and so these are some of the experiences, and also for folks that are like, oh, but not all Israelis. We're talking about the Zionist government that, when I was walking through the old city, stopped me, asked me for my passport, and asked me if I was Muslim. Like, come on. And also, we got detained at multiple checkpoints. I got interrogated when I left the airport because I had a Palestinian flag. There's a lot of violence that we experienced. Again, I experienced tear gassing 3 times while I was there. Not one of the times was I protesting. It's just a regular thing. And they attack children. We went to the Laji Center. Laji is Arabic for refugee. It's the Ida camp. It's one of the smallest refugee camps in the West Bank. And while we were touring the community center, there were children outside, and then we see 7 IOF soldiers, Israeli occupation forces, not IDF. They're not defending shit. They're occupying. The Israeli occupation forces were attacking these 10 children. Stones against guns, military grade equipment, and this is a common occurrence, and this is what people grow up normalizing, which is why, again, we cannot tell people how to resist, because the lived experiences of Palestinians is one that most people have never lived. I've never seen so much occupation and military force in my everyday. I never felt so surveilled. Literally, 7 cameras watching me at all times. They have they have the Pegasus project, which is looking at different ways to surveil Palestinians. And so there's just, it was a beautiful experience, and and Palestinians showed us nothing but love despite being under occupation. We received and felt like home when we were in the West Bank. When we left and when we went through checkpoints, and any encounter that we had with the Zionists felt uncomfortable, felt over policing, felt like our tax dollars should not be funding this shit if what we are fighting for is the liberation of people. And that's one of our biggest goals. Defund, get rid of the Zionist government. Palestinians will decide what happens with their land, and we'll dive into a little bit more specifics when as we continue. But that's a brief summation of my 14 days there, and it was beautiful. And Palestinian food and music is amazing, and the Palestinian people deserve and continue to resist.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that recap and summary. Shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. I have some questions later on. Shout out to Comrade Salifu, to Comrade Erica. We're going to ask you later about U.S. influence in Palestine and some other stuff. Smash Zionism. One thing that you hit on that's very important is the fact that food sovereignty is very, very important because, as one of our favorite revolutionaries, Thomas Sankara, has said, that whoever feeds you controls you, right? And this is part of the tactic of imperialism and Zionism, is they want to do away with your national culture, your national food, your national music, your national cuisine. And part of settler colonialism isn't just the land, but it's also the culture and the food and how people interact. And one thing that I was talking about with a friend of mine who's Palestinian is that one of the problems in Palestine is that you have Zionists who are also creating these malls and mega centers where they're replacing the mom and pop, falafel or kebab spots, or with KFC, McDonald's, Popeyes, Israeli, quote unquote, Israeli versions of Palestinian food sold back to them that's stolen, right? So they're trying to do away slowly with the food, the traditions, the customs of the Palestinian people, through commerce, through these things. And it's very satanic to me. Like, again, like it's something that presents itself as like, we're here to help you. We're here to, bring modernity, and building over graves. Exactly. Like they're doing these things. They're dangling this poison in front of us to try to, they do the same thing in Latin America and the Caribbean, like with their free trade agreements, bringing all these multinational companies, doing away with our traditional staple diets and foods. So, one thing I wanted to ask you, Comrade Falastini, is, give us a rundown of where things stand today. What exactly has been going on in terms of the settlements? I know recently there was in Nablus, I believe, there was a huge uprising. There's been a lot of uprisings. A youth who was a martyr, who was murdered brutally by the Israelis. He has become sort of a national hero, an icon. Give us a rundown of what has been going on and where do you think things are heading?
Okay, so this is a 70-year, let's say 100-year story. And I'm going to try to fit it in about 10 minutes worth of explanation. So, as you all know, Zionism is a fascist, racist, pro-imperialist ideology that aimed to create an exclusive state, and I underline the word exclusive state, for Jews on stolen land that they took away from the Arab inhabitants. So if we were to summarize the Palestinian struggle in one sentence, it's about the land, okay? It's about the Arab land owned by Palestinians, like my family, that was taken away from them by force by these gangs of terrorists called the Zionists that came from Russia, Poland, Europe, United States, other places of the world, and settled into Palestine at the ruins and the destruction of our lands, our homes, our communities, and expelled us outside of the territory known as Palestine. The Palestinian people are the descendants of the
I think you cut off there for a second. Can you hear us, Comrade Falastini? Let's see. Let me see if, can you hear me, Libre? Yeah. Okay. I don't think we can hear you. I think we got you back. We got you back.
The internet
All right, cool.
seems to go. Yeah, the internet.
No,
So the internet goes and comes back. I apologize for that.
no worries, bro. What were you saying? Continue.
So the Palestinians have struggled to regain their homeland ever since the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Now, to give you a quick rundown of how things progressed. Can you hear me now? Am I through? I can hear me.
Yeah, we hear
Okay.
you. You're good.
Okay. So here's the short version of the story. So the Zionist movement holds its first Congress in Switzerland, in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897. 1 year before that, Theodor Herzl writes a book called The Jewish State. In that book, he explains that the only salvation of the Jewish people is to create a state of their own. Parts of the Rothschild family, and this is where the connection to capitalism, imperialism starts, finance the Zionist movement. They provide funding, and through this funding, Zionists begin to organize illegal settlements, illegal settlers that they ship on ships from Europe to Palestine, which is under British mandate. The British mandate at the beginning tries to stop these illegal immigrations because they were afraid of the Arab inhabitants' reaction to this. In fact, during the Zionist Congress of 1897, Jews protested that we couldn't possibly choose Palestine as a home for the Jews because there are Arabs that live there. You can't just go in there and take away their land. So this wasn't something that they weren't aware of. They knew about the Arab inhabitants of the land. They even proposed Uganda and Argentina as alternative settlement for their immigrants, for the Jewish immigrants to set up a state of their own. To cut a long story short, in 1917, part of the Rothschild family, who are German, by the way, German Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, win the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration, Balfour was head minister of the British government. He promises to help the Jews build a homeland for themselves in Palestine. So this goes on for a long time until the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. I'm trying to cut short because of time. And so during that time, the Palestinians had their first armed resistance. They picked up the gun and they fought back. This was in 1936 in what was known as the Qassam Revolution. From 1917, from the day the British promised something they didn't own to people who didn't own it either, to the point of the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, the Palestinians have continuously waged struggle against occupation of their homeland. In fact, on the very month of November, this month, we commemorate the Balfour Declaration of 1917. During 1917 was the first time the British colonialists promised this Arab land to the Jews. And on that very same day, there was a strike all over Palestine. You know, there was a thriving Palestinian country. We had banks, we had a football team, we had radio, we had university, we had schools. There was Palestinian coins, money. So this absurdity that the Palestine, Golda Meir said, there's a famous quote by her, that Zionist witch from Wisconsin. She said there was a land with no people, and that was absolutely a lie. This land has continuously been inhabited by my grandfather, by his father before him, and back all the way to the Canaan civilization, which was 2000 BC. It dates back to 2000 years before the birth of Christ. So there's not even a biblical claim to the land of Palestine. The Canaanites have always existed. These are our ancestors in Palestine continuously. The Israelites only came later. So this land was never owned by the Jews, as they claim. So just again, to make the story shorter, in 1948, they waged these gangs of Zionists, murdered, and massacred Palestinians in famous massacres and genocides like the Deir Yassin genocide and so on, up until the point where they were armed. And this is where the connection cements itself between British and later on American imperialism and Zionism. These two are twins. They are allies of one another. They do not live outside of each other. The Zionist lobby controls the American government. The Zionists control the Democratic Party. The Zionists control the Republican Party. They're the ones that finance the next US president. That is why there has never been a US president that's pro-Palestine. They're all pro-Israel. Harry Truman was the first president to recognize the state of Israel in the world, when Americans didn't know where the state of Israel was. In 1988, when I was in Colorado and I met families and friends, they didn't know where Palestine was. You had to take their finger, put it on a map to show them where Palestine was in the world. They read about it in the Bible, but they thought it was Israel and the Hebrew people owned it. And that's all they knew. They never met a Palestinian. They didn't know there were Arab Palestinians. Oh, by the way, we're both Muslim and Christian Palestinians. Every single US president up until Biden has always been bought by the Zionists, and they still control them. And so, to answer your question, Romero, the Palestinian resistance now is alive and thriving in Palestine. It's expanding and increasing in effectiveness. And when I say the resistance, I mean armed resistance. I mean picking up the gun and fighting Israeli soldiers with bullets. We have, for the first time in many years now, military cells in Nablus under the name of Den of Lions. They have come out. They have declared themselves. They have put video footage of themselves. Just this month, in October and November, they were involved in military combat against commando units of the Zionist army. These commando units went into Nablus, where they were confronted with bullets. They went into Jenin, where they were confronted with bullets. And these cells, these military cells, for the first time, had a standoff with the Zionist army, which is very, very encouraging. Okay, this is a very recent development. This is where the Palestinian resistance right now is, but that's not only where it is. What we have is a situation in Palestine today where we have missile capability in Gaza. Gaza besieged, under attack continuously for at least the last 3-4 decades, now has the capability to paralyze all of Israel in an hour by showering it with hundreds of missiles and rockets. Now Israel has to think many, many times before it attacks Gaza, because Gaza has demonstrated a superior quality missile capability, which has never been before. We have missile capability to confront Israel in Gaza. We have military cells with the Den of Lions in the West Bank. And we have the ongoing sit-ins in Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And just to give you an idea, the residents of Jerusalem, the Arab residents of Jerusalem, have been fighting to preserve the Al-Aqsa Mosque from demolition, at least for the last 2-3 years, who has been under serious attack by Zionists settlers, extremists, politicians, army personnel, all under the protection of the Israeli army and all under the patronage of the Israeli government. They have been trying to drive the Arab residents of Jerusalem out. They have been trying to demolish the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the residents of Jerusalem have been leading a heroic fight against them. And when I say civil disobedience, including sit-ins, there are also tens upon tens of stabbings of Israeli soldiers that have taken place. There have been individual, lone wolf attacks where residents of 1948 Palestinians would carry a gun, walk out of their home, and shoot down, half a dozen Zionists, whether soldiers or anybody within the vicinity, in fact. And this has been ongoing and escalating. Israel is losing control of its dominance in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, and over.
Let's see. I think you cut out there for a second, Comrade Falastini. Let's see if you get him back. Damn, so much amazing truth and information there. I was so glued to what he was saying. Let's see. I think he'll be back soon. Can you hear us, Comrade Falastini? Can you hear us? No? I think I hear him.
I'm back now.
Okay, perfect.
I'm
Yeah,
back now.
thank you. We lost you for a second, but continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, so the good news is the resistance is well and alive. And that doesn't mean that Palestine is going to be liberated tomorrow. The Palestinian people still have a long way to go. And just to give you an idea of how important this fight is, if it was easy to liberate Palestine, the US imperialists wouldn't have been involved. They need to be there. I mean, all of this, the very fact that Israel continues to exist is because of the American imperialist patronage of Israel. The arms it supplies, the political cover that it gives it in the United Nations and all over the world, they blackmail governments of the world to recognize the state of Israel. They are blackmailing Arab governments to normalize relations with Israel. They continue to support a corrupt Palestinian Authority in the West Bank that colludes with the Zionists and the Israeli army and actually snitches on fighters and gives away their locations to the Israeli officials and security members. This country of Israel is one of the most criminal, brutal, fascist, dangerous country to the whole region and the world. This country, what country in the world you have an American citizen, Shireen Abu Akleh, a reporter in the West Bank, is shot by an Israeli soldier that smashes the back of her skull with a bullet, with an explosive bullet, knowing she's a reporter. And the American government can't even, the best they can do is ask for an investigation. When the whole world witnessed the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh in the West Bank. I'm glad Comrade Libre is back from the olive harvesting season, because right now it's olive harvesting season in Palestine. Before him, there was a lady called Rachel Corrie. You remember her? She was bulldozed. I mean, talking about, I'm glad you're back alive. You're dealing with the most criminal, fascist, barbaric government and army in the whole world. These people have no qualms about killing any activist that comes in support of Palestinians. They killed Rachel Corrie before. They ran her skull over with a bulldozer for wanting to defend Palestinian lands from being occupied by the Israeli government. They literally ran her over with a bulldozer. She came from Portland, I believe. And so it's easy for them to kill anybody. They killed Shireen Abu Akleh in cold blood purposefully, on deliberately, knowing she was an American citizen because she was exposing their crimes against the Palestinian people. So you're not walking into a place that respects human life, nor human rights, nor democracy. What country in the world, can you imagine if a Palestinian carries a military operation against an Israeli soldier and kills that Israeli soldier, or even wounds that Israeli soldier? On the very next day, the government of Israel dispatches bulldozers to demolish their parents' home. Can you imagine this happening in the United States? Some guy, let's say a Black Panther, shoots down an officer somewhere. Then the US government sends bulldozers to bring down the family home, his parents' home. Can you imagine how the reaction of the American people or that neighborhood would be to something like that? This happens in Israel every day. So we're not dealing with a normal government here. We're dealing with a bunch of thugs, criminals that are a threat to the whole world. And speaking to the point that Ramiro brought up earlier, the link between the danger of Zionism on world peace, whether in Latin America or in Africa or in Asia or anywhere else in the world. You know, there was a lady by the name of Fusako Shiganobu. She's a Japanese Red Army guerrilla. She was released recently because she participated in armed combat operations in support of Palestine, along with Kozo Okamoto. Both are members of the Red Army of Japan. They started the Red Army of Japan and volunteered their lives to fight the Zionists and the Israelis. They did this, yeah, that's a beautiful picture of her. They did this because they knew that when they were fighting Zionism in Palestine, they were fighting to defeat imperialism all over the world, including Japan's salvation from imperialism. So they put their lives on the line. So the work that you guys are doing for Palestine, there were hundreds of fighters before that volunteered to participate, because in today's world, if you're fighting for Palestine, you're fighting imperialism and you're fighting Zionism. It is at the forefront of anti-imperialist struggle in the world.
Wow, beautifully said. It's such powerful words, Comrade Falastini. I could talk to you for hours, man. I'd love to have you back on. I know in your time it's running kind of late, so I'm not going to keep you on too much longer. But before you go, I do just want to play a clip and get your quick reaction, and then we'll go back to Libre. Libre, do you have about maybe like 20 or so more minutes that you can stay with us? All right, cool. Because I know Comrade Falastini in his time zone is much later. But I do want you to respond, Comrade Falastini, to this one video. This is a Muslim YouTuber out in Brooklyn. I have to find out his name. I have to give him props. But he walked in the street and asked members of the Jewish community their thoughts on the Palestine-Israel conflict. I just want to play some of this and get your thoughts, especially talking about the psychology of Zionism and how people justify this apartheid, this genocide, with this victim narrative. So I'm going to play this, and then we'll get your reaction.
Will ever be peace between Palestine and Israel?
Huh? Of course.
I don't know. Hopefully one day.
Could be. Yeah, I think so.
I believe so. You got to think positive.
Do you think there can be peace between Palestine and Israel?
I don't think so. I hope so. I hope so.
But how can it be better? How can there be peace between both?
Everybody should say, okay, let me lenient on this and lenient on that, and that's it. Everybody should give up a little bit.
Do you think it's right for Israelis to go to Palestine and take the Palestinian homes?
I don't have an opinion on this.
Like, no, I'm just saying, like.
I don't have an opinion.
No, I'm saying, do you think it's right?
I think it's not right to make terror attacks.
Do you justify Israel's actions towards Palestine?
No idea.
Okay, what's your opinion on what's happening between Israel and Palestine?
I'm not watching the news.
Do you justify Israel's actions towards Palestine?
What action are they talking about?
You know, them taking people's homes and
Are they doing that?
you know, like Israelis, they're taking the Palestinian
Are they doing
homes.
that? I have no idea. Are they doing that?
Yeah, they're doing that for sure.
That's really mean.
Huh?
You sure they're doing
No,
that?
I swear they're doing that.
No, I'm not. I don't live in
Okay,
America.
what about the war that's going on between Israel and Palestine?
There's a war now?
Yeah, the conflict. The conflict.
What conflict?
So you don't watch the news?
I don't watch the news now.
So what about the kids and men and women being killed? What do you think about that?
Which kids?
Palestinian kids, man. I know, come on, man.
I thought there's a war in Ukraine. There's another war also going on?
No,
That's crazy, man. These wars gotta stop. That's crazy.
no, there's a war. Where are you going? It's been happening for years, man. Sabah al-khair, this guy, man. They don't want to say the truth, man. Do you justify Israel's actions towards Palestine?
No.
No, right? Sir, what do you think on what's happening in Palestine?
No.
Please.
No.
What do you think about what's happening in Palestine? Quick question. Why is he running away like that, man? I want to ask you a question. What do you think on what's happening in Palestine?
Learn something about.
Why is he running? Why is he running away? Question. What's your thoughts on what's happening in Palestine? Huh?
Have a good day.
Huh? Sir, what's your thoughts? Hello? You doing all right? Sir, what's your opinion on what's happening in Palestine? Huh? Sir, what do you think about the conflict between both?
I think that people have conflict when they're passionate. You know, I think so a lot of people think, you know, why can't everybody just get along, right?
Right.
So when you look at people who just say, why don't you just get along? There's the people that don't have values.
Right.
So there's the people who don't have things that they really care about.
100%.
Because if somebody's parking in their driveway, suddenly they don't say, let's get along, right? Now, the key is, the trick is, could you be passionate, have things you truly care about,
Right.
and be able to communicate effectively,
100%.
and also be able to resolve things. Now that doesn't mean everybody getting along.
Right.
That means you have a power struggle, but you're able to do it without causing people to get hurt.
Right.
And because if this is important for you, if this is so important for you, let's just say you have a couple that they break up, and there's a battle over custody. You say, why don't you get along? Why don't you just go give in and give up your child? That's a stupid thing to say. That's a very stupid thing to say. You care about your child. You don't want to give up your child. On the other hand, yeah.
We're not doing anything, man. He likes the conversation.
Yeah.
We're not causing trouble, man.
Are you like police patrolling or something? You like community patrol or something? Why
No,
do you
actually-
we have a very peaceful conversation?
Yeah.
Just people's opinion.
That's it.
If
So
you don't like it, keep going. But you can't tell us to get out. Like,
So they called the cops on him. A very interesting video. Comrade Falastini, your reaction to that, the psychology behind Zionism.
I need to find you a video of the same type of thing happening inside of Palestine, where this guy with this, I guess she's American or European, she interviews Israelis and asks them the same type of question. And, you know, most of the answers are, we need to just kill all the Arabs. So it's really very, very different than this type of reaction. Let me just comment this. You know, I was recently in Venice, Italy. And if you go to Venice, Italy, Venice, beautiful city on the water, you'll actually pass through a Jewish ghetto. You know, the Jews, they need to decide something for themselves. They have to decide on this one question. If they can answer this one question, I think they'll have a nice, peaceful life for eternity. Are you going to be citizens of the countries you belong to, or do you believe you need to be the chosen people of God that have an exclusive state of your own? If you choose to be citizens of the countries that you belong to, you can live anywhere in the world you want. You can go to Brooklyn, New York, Manhattan. You can go even to Arabia. You are welcome to come and live in Arabia. In Palestine, we had in 1948, when the creation of Israel took place, we had 5% of the Palestinians Jews. That's perfectly fine. Our national charter, the unamended version, because Yasser Arafat and Bill Clinton changed it. and I can talk about that if you like later, if you have time. But our unamended charter from the 1960s says in it that any Jew born in Palestine before the creation of Israel, which is 5% of the population, is Palestinian. We have no problem with that. We've known that since we were children. But you, and I address the Jewish, anyone who adheres to Judaism, the religion, like these guys that you saw in the video, if you want to be citizens of the countries you live in, just like the rest of us, if I carry a US passport, I'm an American citizen, and you are an American citizen. If you live in Palestine, I'm Palestinian, you're Palestinian. But you having an exclusive right for a state of your own where no one else is allowed. You know, the Israeli constitution, you have to swear on this. You know,
I think he, let's see, I think he cut out for a second. Let's just wait for him to come back. Shout out to everybody who's watching, listening.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, we got you back. We got you back. Keep going.
You have to swear in Israel. You have to swear that this is a exclusive state for Jews only. And if you go to Venice, Italy, if you go to Italy today, if you go to Venice, you'll still see those same characters in that video, where they want to be excluded from everybody else. They want to live in a ghetto. What they've created in Palestine is a big ghetto called the State of Israel. Well, you can't have a ghetto. You're going to live with everyone else, just like everybody else lives, okay? And if we have the chance to build a socialist state, you're going to be welcome in a socialist state, just like everybody else. You are not entitled for an exclusive state of your own, especially on the ruins and the destruction of the lives of the indigenous people that have lived there since 2000 BC, okay? And this is the question the Jews have to answer for themselves. You want to be part of the world? Be it. You want to create a ghetto? You will not be allowed to create a ghetto in Palestine. Go create a ghetto in Manhattan or Brooklyn or anywhere else you want, if the United States government wants you to. But we will not have you create a ghetto on the Arab land of Palestine.
Beautifully said. No, wow, that is so powerful, Comrade Falastini. And he's exactly right. I think one thing that's important to mention, especially, is that one of the earliest mentions of the Palestinians, back then referred to as the Philistines, is recorded almost in the year 2000 BC, closer to around 1153, by the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III, who was engaged in battle with the Philistines. And these are ancient artifacts that are recorded. That is objective truth and fact, that the Palestinians are indigenous to that land way before the Israelites came. And they even mention in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, that they are a foreign nation and alien peoples. They even say that in their own book. So it's important to mention that, you know, to set that straight, because people always believe, they always kind of frame the situation as like, well, the Israelites were there before the Palestinians, and they're coming back to the land. No, it didn't belong to them in the first place. Like, the Palestinians are indigenous to that land, and it's important to set that record straight. Anything else you want to mention, Comrade Falastini, before you head out? Because I know your time, I think it's like 11 or 12, almost midnight out there. Anything you want to close with? I definitely love to have you back on soon, by the way. I feel like there's so much to cover, especially with the historical aspect. But any final thoughts you want to offer before you head out?
Yeah, I think for the generation of activists today, and I want to, before I forget, I want to salute Comrade Libre, because he is in one of the most reactionary states to be a communist, because he has so many of those anti-Cuba, agents of the CIA living in Florida, and Miami. And I've been to Miami, and I've been to most of Florida. I've been to Orlando, Fort Lauderdale, by the way, big Zionist, Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale. If you go to those areas, that's where the big Jewish money is. And you'll find a lot of Zionists there that have taken up nice homes, And I always tell them, if you love if America loves Israel so much, they can have all 6 million Jews move to Florida. There's plenty of places there. They can even give them Alaska if they want. But
that'd be
but
awesome.
America is a lot better place for you, because if you live in Palestine, that will be your grave one day. And I'm not saying that out of villain. I'm not a villain, but I'm telling you the truth. If I'm looking after your safety, please take your children away from Palestine. Go back to Brooklyn. Go back to Poland. Go back to Russia. Go back to the United States. Is a lovely place to live. They love Jews, especially in these rich Zionists. You saw them on the video, right? You can wear all kinds of hats and coats and anything. You can do whatever you want. Nobody's going to come near you. You can live a really nice life. There's very nice beachfront. If you have money, you can buy some homes off of Palm Beach. But leave Palestine, because this is going to be your grave. If it's not your grave already, and the fear you live, because we know our friends inside Palestine, they tell us how afraid you are. I have a very good friend of mine. I was speaking to him 2 weeks ago. He lives in Haifa. He carries an Israeli passport, but he's Arab Palestinian. And he told me, I have a friend of mine. He's a good guy. He's Israeli. He told me, look, if the Arabs ever come and attack us and take Palestine back, I feel I'm okay, because I was born here before 1948. And your constitution says that I belong here. So they're not going to do anything to me. And he's right. Anybody born before 1948 is welcome to stay. If you don't want to risk your life, if you're really afraid, Comrade Libre, he was saying, not all Israelis are bad and so on. If you're not bad, go back to the other country that you belong to. Okay? There's no reason for you to be in Palestine. This is not your land. You want to go, United States is a lovely place, as I said. They will embrace you. They're imperialists. They're capitalists. They love Zionists. Okay? You can thrive in the United States. We will fight you in the United States, but it'll be a different kind of fight. But your lives, your children's lives, those missiles in Gaza, they're coming. And those Den of Lion fighters, they're ready to fight. And our people inside of 1948 Palestine that have been running you over with cars and stabbing you and opening fire at you in coffee shops and so on, they're sending you a very clear message. You don't belong here. Pick up your bags for your own safety, for your children's safety. Leave Palestine. The sooner you do that, the more peace this region is going to have, and the more we will have in terms of stopping imperialism and cutting its tail off in Arabia and in all over our region. And then we can fight them in the United States as well. But that's a different kind of fight. And that's what I'd like to finish with. For the activists that are active today, support the Boycott of Israel movement. The Boycott of Israel movement is making its way strong within American politics today, and it needs our support. It's one way, it's one weapon that we can use to stop the Zionists inside of the United States, to encourage companies, artists, sports figures, everyone we can get the message out. Boycott Israel. Do not go to Israel. Do not have a concert in Israel. Do not go play football in Israel. Do not host Israelis in American universities. Do not buy Israeli products that are basically sending money to kill Palestinians inside of Palestine. Please get involved with the boycott movement. It's important. It's also called BDS, the divestment movement in the United States. And that's one way you can be involved in America in fighting for Palestine. And thank you very much for having me, and very happy to be back whenever the opportunity presents itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade. Free Palestine, Comrade Falastini, Moghtareb. Amazing stuff. We're definitely going to have you back on. I'd love to have you back on at some point to talk about your books and your work, because you're also a talented people scholar, a revolutionary scholar. So I'd love to have back you on to discuss that. Amazing stuff and just very inspirational words from you. Thank you so much, brother. I hope you have a great week. Take care. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to turn to some questions that some of the comrades asked in the chat for Comrade Libre. Shout out to Comrade Salifu. You guys have seen him on the stream. An amazing comrade. Can Libre talk about how they personally saw any U.S. influence in their trip to Palestine? Side note, Libre, I am so proud to know you.
Salifu, the comrade. Shout out, Comrade Salifu. In terms of U.S. influence and the trip to Palestine, the checkpoints are a perfect example of the U.S. influence in Palestine. These checkpoints have sharpshooters. There are tanks. Everybody has military-grade weapons that come from relationship to the U.S. So a lot of when in the U.S. we talk about the police state. In occupied Palestine, it's a military state, right? Zionism is very much what we fear it would happen in the U.S. If the U.S. Army decides to take on the role of the police, which is kind of happening already. You can see that in full reality in Palestine, and the other ways in which there's influence is these trips, these birthright trips that where you see groups of Zionists coming to this land that is not theirs, and it's something that is funded again by the U.S. And the Christian evangelicals. A lot of the groups touring, a lot of the groups that were touring while we were there, we had our own type of experience touring Palestine, but a majority of people were there for religious reasons, because there's a lot of historical religious sites in Palestine. But a majority of these groups had tour guides that were quote unquote Israeli Zionists that get these tours get funding from the U.S. to subsidize, and from the Israeli government to subsidize individuals coming to occupied Palestine, going on tours, and being spoon-fed a narrative of how Zionists are somehow the original people of the land, that have a history that is tied to the land. Zionists have no history to the land except genocidal and occupation. Jews, on the other hand, do, but that is a different relationship, because as the comrade was saying, Comrade Palestine, right? This idea that there is friction between Jews and Arabs. There's Palestinian Jews. So what the fuck are you gonna tell me about some friction when the reality is that Jews have lived in Palestine for a long time? It's not a contradiction to be Jewish and Palestinian, because there are Arab Jews. The difference comes in when the ideology of Zionism comes in and creates Jewish supremacy, which is not something that is tied to Judaism, nor is it something that's tied to Jews in general. And so we have to attack a lot of these very paper straw arguments about the U.S. is just making sure that the Israelis are safe because they're being attacked by Arabs. The only attacking that I saw outside of the international groups that support Palestinians were attacks on Palestinians. And what we also have to understand is, as Filiberto Ojeda says, it is the right of any country that is being occupied to resist in whatever way they decide to resist. And this is the right because you do not allow other people to invade your country. And so the U.S. influence is alive and well in the surveillance. The police. I live in Miami, Florida, occupied Miccosukee-Quasin Seminole land, where our police department goes to Israel, gets trained by the IOF soldiers, and then come back. What do we see in 2020 when we were protesting and I got shot? It was the same bullets that were being used by the Israeli occupation forces against Palestinians. in the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and Trayvon Martin, it was Palestinians who sent advice on how to deal with tear gas, because we're being tear gassed by the same canisters used against Palestinians. The resistance struggles are intertwined in the same way that our governments that do not represent us are attacking Palestinians and attacking protesters in the U.S. And so the connection and the influence in the U.S. is solidified by the very existence of the illegal country of so-called, or illegal state of so-called Israel. That is the U.S. influence. It would not exist without U.S. funding. There is no way that it would be possible that without the military support of the U.S. government, that so-called Israeli Zionists would even be able to be in Palestine, because Palestine is Arab and it is in the Arab world, right? You're trying to create an unnatural thing and put it into natural ground, and it doesn't stick, but you're trying to force it to stay there, right? But guess what? Olive trees have deeper roots. They've been there for a long time, in the same way that Palestinians are natural to the land and are the only ones that should be on this land, because it is their land. It is what is tied to their history. It is what's tied to their culture. It is theirs, and we cannot pretend like another reality or another thing exists. And even this idea of Zionism being the bastions of democracy. Tell me of a democracy when you're the only country that can imprison children. Tell me of democracy when you have military checkpoints. Tell me of democracy when you don't allow or recognize the human rights of people that have lived on that land. Tell me of human rights by people that burn trees, that burn olive trees, that rape, kill children with no consequences. That is not democracy.
Definitely. Yeah, most definitely. Beautifully said, Comrade Libre. I really appreciate all your feedback. I'm glad you made it back okay. I'm glad you made it back safe. And it must be beautiful to actually go to Palestine. What's interesting is that in Central America actually is home to one of the largest Palestinian diaspora communities in Honduras and Nicaragua. I think Chile has the largest Palestinian diaspora in Latin America. Then is Honduras, and then is Nicaragua. And in our countries, we have a long history of a lot of revolutionary Palestinians. In El Salvador, for example, the founder of the FMLN, the communist guerrilla movement of the 80s, was Shafiq Handal, who was a Palestinian from Bethlehem, I believe. And throughout in Nicaragua as well, a lot of Palestinian descended people all over Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's cool to see those histories intertwine, and very interesting to learn about that. I really appreciate your work, man. I hope all is well. Thank you so much for joining. I definitely want to have you back on soon. And again, shout out to Comrade Falastini Moghtareb, who joined us, and he was a Palestinian-American university professor and socialist, and Libre is an Afro-Boricua poet, organizer, and communist based out of Miami with Troika. Shout out to Troika, and shout out to everybody who is watching and listening. I appreciate you all. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Free Palestine, death to Israel, one state Palestinian solution. Long live the Palestinian resistance. Love you guys. Have a great weekend and take care.
والذيول الأصايل والشعب فيا